other benefits to build a society, build a country where the wealth is not forged, right, and consumed with indulgence, but that better policies that could really help distribute the wealth for all. And so the overconsumption does not happen. So I think I want to conclude here. There is this story that Jesus told in the New Testament of a man that he did pretty well, right? And he had quite an abundant harvest. And instead of thinking, oh, you know what, let me see, I've been blessed, let me share this wealth with others, right? Instead, he says, I wonder what should I do? I'll do this. I'm going to tear down my barn and build bigger ones and bigger corporations. And you know what? I'm just going to store my surplus gain and kind of, gorge as well. And he says, you know what? I have so much laid for many years. I'm going to take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. And this part is also interesting because, again, studies have shown that, life without meaning, life where you don't serve others, life with that actually leads to a faster, quicker death. And so if you live beyond yourself for others, that you have a much more meaningful and a happier life. And yet here you see this gentleman who wants to eat, drink, and be merry. And I think even for me, if today I won the lotto and I won $100 million, I think my initial thought would be, I want to eat, drink, and be merry too, and kind of throw off all the other responsibilities as well. But in the next verse, it's kind of interesting. It says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? And I think I want to go back to the beginning, where this is a deadly sin of overconsumption, overindulgence, lack of self-restraint or discipline, whether it is obesity with food, whether it's with drinking, or even consumption of wealth, that it does lead to death or deaths. And so the final verse, it says, this is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God. And so again, I think that there are many of us who are believers in this Zoom room. And I just want to throw out, what are some areas in your life, whether it is food, drinking, wealth, perhaps there might be other areas in which we have lacked the discipline and lacked the heart to be greedy instead of being giving and generous, that leads to life, right? That leads to wealth and being rich towards God, and that which leaves a legacy not of being greedy. And I think, again, there are many rich barons of history who were horrible during their life, but at their death, they came to their senses and said, aha, I'm going to meet my maker. What can I do? And have left a lot of stuff for philosophy. So I just want to say thank you for this time. And I'm going to conclude, and I'll open up for discussion. And this is a way that you might be able to get in touch with me in the future.
Thanks, Hyepin. That was wonderful. That was actually very interesting to me, especially because with New Testament stuff is not certainly my strong suit of stuff I know. So I have a question for you. When if nobody minds if I ask the first question. In the first session when we discussed wrath seemed to be basically not such a great thing. Pride, there was a lot of discussion. When is pride good and when is pride not so good? Gluttony seems like wrath, even there was justifiable anger and stuff like that. Is gluttony ever good? Is there a point at which a healthy appetite turns into gluttony? I'm not just talking about an appetite for food, but an appetite for when I think of gluttonous people, whether it's an appetite for food or alcohol or wealth or any of the other things you mentioned?
I think that's a good question. And I think, again, everything, there's balance. That's how I believe God created the universe. And anything in excess, at a certain point, it tilts the other way. I think even this Biden's victory, I think, was again a push against the other extreme. But then the other extreme, Trump being elected, was also again pushed against Obama's election. So I think, again, it balanced in the world the way it's created. My dad right now is in a nursing home, and his weight has dropped significantly, and his ability to consume food has also dropped. And so in this process of walking with my dad, I've come to have a greater appreciation for having an appetite and the capacity to eat food, and also to actually get rid of the waste in our body that I used to think was like so ugly and so like I don't want to touch it, right? But I've come to have a great appreciation that our body being able to function properly, to have an appetite, and also to be able to release all the bad stuff, is something that God created and is needed. And so I would say, whether it's appetite for food, hunger for, I think, I would say for me, actually in the Bible, in the New Testament, it talks about hunger for righteousness. And so I think in those kind of places, there's a place where things are for good, that perhaps being gluttonous. But I think a lot of times, though, that gluttony could turn into self-righteousness. And I think that's the other danger. So again, I think everything in balance is so critical. But I think, for a country like Korea, President Obama mentioned that in was it the 60s or 70s, the country of Kenya and Korea had the same GDP. And Korea had just come out of the war and they were hungry. And it eventually led to, Korea being like the 5th largest trading partner for California. And, the creation of, I would say, Samsung products, and even, I would say, Korean, Korean Wave and BTS. So I think there is a place for hunger as well, but not overconsumption. Yeah.
When do you go from hunger to overconsumption? That's always my problem. You always see me from the shoulders up tonight, but if you saw, you would know that the past 8 months has been some overconsumption.
I do have to say, like as you get older, you get wiser, right? And there is something very visceral about going to like a buffet, right? And or Las Vegas, and you see the abundance of food, and you just, the initial body response is joy. But I think I've learned over time that, you pile on this amazing amount of food. And again, buffet is another place where people kind of tolerate you having like 6 or 7 plates all in one setting, right? But I've come to learn over time again that it's just not wise. At the end of that meal, I don't feel good, and I realize that I can't remember what I ate. It's all things get blended per se. I don't get to enjoy the company because I'm just so focused on just consuming all that food. So I think, again, the Bible was right on about, again, that it leads to death, and death of a lot of other things that you don't get to enjoy by just overindulging on anything.
Does anyone else have something that they wanted to weigh in on that one? Food is such a hot button issue. Susan, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just was thinking as you were talking about how COVID causes a loss of sense of smell and taste, and that loss for those who are, surviving it, is one of the most horrific parts of the disease. And that smell and taste, at its best are really a rich, enriching part of our lives, and can lead to gluttony, I suppose, but can also be just a part of, existence that's pleasurable. And it's ironic that this disease, which does so much harm, also does that as well. I don't know, it's sort of just a random thought, but it seemed to somehow be connected.
I totally agree with you. I think again the example of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, those trees were a gift that God gave us, and so our sense of taste and smell is also a gift. And I think even the gift of hunger is a gift, right? And so again, I think there's a certain amount of stewardship that's required to be able to take care of those and enjoy those gifts. And when that stewardship is lacking, the discipline, and it's dominated by greed, that takes away the gift of that gift as well. So I think that's a good point.
I thought it was interesting that you had a picture of Jeff Bezos there, because there's so much discussion now about income inequality and things like that. And hey, and those of us who have worked in the nonprofit world have learned, to our surprise, that money just plays a very important part in it. And I know what's been interesting and a surprising part, and Enoch, you worked at a church, so there was fundraising involved, I'm sure, and a number of you have done stuff like that. Has surprised me is that we are told that the pursuit of money is not a good thing, but the fact is, then it wasn't until working in the nonprofit world that I discovered how important money was to make things happen. And I never thought about money. I worked in Hollywood for years and never thought about money. And then when working in the nonprofit world, suddenly I think about money from the moment I wake up till the moment I go to sleep, and had never thought of it before. And it's just sort of an interesting and surprising, I don't know, disconnect or something. And part of it is I know for what I do, we work with lots of people who have lots of money and who are lucky, and they know it and are incredibly generous. And so it's also been, I sometimes find and that sometimes there is this sort of fiction that rich people are not nice and poor people are nice. And that, if there's something I've learned from this, there are some rich people who are extremely nice and some poor people who are jerks. Just because someone is poor doesn't make them nice either. So it's just interesting to me, because it kind of goes against what I had always, what we're sort of taught in the mythology of a lot of this stuff.
Well, so the Methodists are, what the founder is John Wesley, and one of the things that he said was something like, make as much money as you can and then give as much as you can. And so I think again, as a Christian, there is this sense that money is evil, or something that, again, I don't think is so biblical, but there is some sense of that. And so people seek not to be rich, but as you have mentioned, David, that there's very generous people, including like Warren Buffett, who again said, I'm going to not die with my money, I'm going to give, while I'm living. And I think also Bill Gates and others are, taking that model to give during their lifetime. And so I think again, as a society, what do we do with that money, right? And that verse in the Bible says, be rich towards God. And I think for me, that equivalent is giving to others who are in need, and not just pouring everything to yourself. That ultimately leads to death, period, as well.
One thing that I found interesting in doing this, I've given money, and then while we're talking about Gluttony, a great deal of thought. And what I find interesting is that there are people who are generous at all socioeconomic levels. Like we have people that come through who will give us, you know, their donation in coins and in dollars, and others who give it in enormous amounts. And I quite frankly find it pretty much humbling all the time, you know, however it comes through. And the other thing I find that is sort of interesting in terms of money is that no matter what neighborhood you're in, no matter what community you're in, there's the rich person and there's the poor person. It's just, it can all be relative. And you know, when you hear the statistics of however much of the wealth in the US is owned by 65 people or 59 people, whatever it is,
Yeah.
shocking. I'd be curious to who's overseeing their philanthropy, but that's a different subject.
Yeah. 59 people. Yeah. 2.9 trillion, $2.09 trillion. I think Lois wants to say something. If you do, you have to unmute yourself.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you're
Can
unmuted.
you hear me? I was wondering whether you've observed, or anybody here, I think that there's a difference in our country culturally, just different areas of the country where people find gluttony or overdoing it, one society from another, not necessarily a particular group, but sort of an agreed, are you fat, are you thin, is this a normal meal with cornbread and barbecue and potatoes versus 3 celery sticks and a pomegranate. I wonder if anybody else has a feeling about that, or even within our own community, if there's various ideas about that.
Hmm. I think that's a good question. And I think each culture and society, they have their own role. So actually, I don't know the word so much overconsumption, but in American society, even now for me, I can't imagine wanting to eat lumps of fat, right? That sounds horrible. But I remember as a kid growing up in South Korea, so this is in the early 70s, because I came when I was 7, where there will be this soup, you know, pan of soup, and there will be these fat, you know, like just rolling around in that pan. And we were encouraged to eat the fat because we need to get fat. They would say, this will help you get fat, right? And it was because the country itself was so poor and nutrition or access to food was limited. And so I guess everyone, it must have been, I mean, I was just a kid at the time. I didn't think much of it. And now like you're raising the question is making me think. You know, and the thing is my family was not that poor and we weren't, you know, like skinny, like bones and things like that, but still in our culture at the time, that's what we said. And actually a greeting that's still even now maybe used as when we meet someone is to say, have you eaten? And so again, I think in that way, the definition of what is good and what we should be eating, I think varies with the context and history as well. And I think perhaps even, I was watching this on Facebook, but Miss Korea, South Korea, I think it was 2018, she was 5'8" and 130 pounds, which to me, I think she's skinny, but I guess in South Korean culture, that's considered fat. And so, you know, here she was doing this interview and there's a moment where she breaks down because her father, who initially objected to her, you know, going out for this competition, you know, but eventually she won, and you would think that would be like a joyous occasion, but there was all these like social media, you know, write-ups, right? saying, how dare she, she's so fat, why is she Miss Korea? And her father was reading all those articles and it just, hurt her so much. But 5 feet and 130 pounds, that's considered fat. I wish I was 5 feet 8. I wish I was that tall and I wish I weighed 130 pounds. So yeah. Marty.
So thank you. This has been fascinating. On the question of different ethnic communities, one of the reasons that I have loved to go to Korean restaurants is the abundance of banchan and the all-you-can-eat barbecue. And it was a challenge to eat until you were so stuffed. And that makes me think of Jewish homes in which hospitality and love mean filling every square inch of the table with food.
Yes.
And then I think probably in, in Arab cultures, putting out a banquet is a way of welcoming your guests. And I don't think of, well, except maybe in the Jewish case, as accessories to gluttony. So that indulgence, the chance you could indulge is a way of expressing, to some degree that you're prosperous, but also that you're generous and you want your guest to feel as though they could have everything that they want. This is an unrelated random thought, but as long as I'm talking, I was thinking about the gluttony as a word that we use metaphorically. And the first expression that came to mind, and maybe there are others, is I'm a glutton for punishment. And it's an interesting choice of a way of putting it. You're not quite saying you're a masochist. And there's something, it's like a humble brag. I can take anything. It shows that you've got capacity, even for hardships. And I'm just wondering if there are any other uses that come to mind of gluttony in a kind of a positive way.
I think you're raising a good point, and so let me think about it while I'm sharing, right? Or maybe other people might have thoughts, but the generosity factor, right, of Korean restaurants. I always tell friends, if I was to open up a restaurant, the restaurant that I would not open is a Korean restaurant, because literally you could just, you don't even have to order a dish. I mean, literally with all the side dishes that you could order as much and refill as you want with the rice, right? It just comes with the main meal. It's very, very generous. And so in that way, I'm proud that our community, our country is in that way. But as a restaurant owner, I would say Korean restaurant, no way, right? Although I would say if I opened up a restaurant, I would say the Japanese restaurant, right? Sushi, you don't need to cook. And every piece, there's a charge for it, right? But it's considered very elegant as well. So again, there's pros and cons to that. But the gluttony for punishment, a positive word. Does anyone else have I see Andy. Oh, Andy and Jim, or I guess Jim's wife, I'm assuming. So Andy, you want to go ahead, and then we'll have, maybe you could say your name. Oh, Andy, we need you to unmute.
Marty, let me begin by saying, mein Kind.
What was that?
Which is eat, my child.
Oh, yes, yes.
Of course,
yes.
but yes, in terms of a positive attitude towards gluttony, a woman who lived right here in the neighborhood, please, Mae West, who famously said, too much of a good thing is wonderful. Yeah.
Agree.
Yeah, and so joyless anything is terrible. Gluttony, just eating to consume is terrible. but eating with joy, eating that fat, eating that fat when it's so tasty to you, this is wonderful. And then we have to watch it a little bit. That's all.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think Jim's.
Yeah, it's me. It's hi, and my name is Beth. I'm Jim's wife,
Hi, Beth.
friend.
You're a person in your own right, dear.
I
You're
need-
not just my
I
wife.
need my own square.
You're Beth Holmes, damn it.
I had a few thoughts. One, I really agree with what Andy was saying, that if we didn't have the capacity as humans to enjoy something and have passion about it, we wouldn't have this requirement to scale back. For some reason, our species does overindulge to gain some learning experience from looking at moderation or not. My younger brother was obese because of medications he was on, and indeed he died of a heart attack because of his obesity, and there wasn't a kinder, gentler, more humane librarian on the planet. But it's the only 7 of the sins, I think, that appears overtly to the rest of the people around you, right? My wrath or my envy or my pride or my whatever, I can keep guarded, and the person in the airplane seat next to me isn't throwing judgment about my cholesterol or my where I fall in the stats or my COVID culpability. And being so close to someone, and I know a lot of women who indeed consider their overeating an addiction and pursue, and men, and pursue treatment for it. And it's the thing that the rest of us are making assessments about, where in the other discussions, we'd have to quietly admit, you know, I do have a issue with my self-righteousness, and that's the sin, or even my lust, unless you're, you know, doing stuff overtly. What's his name from CNN? Anyway,
Jeffrey Tubin.
yeah.
Jeffrey Tubin. Right.
That could be an addiction issue too. So I find it interesting that it also can bring out other deadly sins from the rest of us to judge, when I really do agree that I am not particularly a foodie, but I love my friends who cook passionately and who can taste things. It's not about weight issue for me one way or the other. That's not the comment I'm making, but the joy that my brother had with food, because it wasn't just him, is extraordinary to be around. And I was also guilty of judging. And I wish I had known, his doctor didn't know he had a heart problem, you know? So the fact that we put so much judgment, our daughter has a new baby. And you know how we raise our kids in America? Like, don't give them sugar cereal at first, and make sure you give them the squash and the carrots before the applesauce. There's a different, more progressive thinking about that with babies right now. That is, stop putting this good and bad fundamentalist approach on it, and sure, processed sugar isn't good, but try and have a more, not enforce a moderate eating habit, but a more moderate perspective on the experience. It's sort of like when we overassign something a negative quality, that imbues it with a negative quality, when sugarcane is a crop for a reason. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I think those are good points. Again, I think with everything, so I go back to balance in the sense of, you know, when we start emphasizing so much on one thing, that we become self-righteous, or we become overindulgent over something. And so again, going back to that place of, I think, joy, I think that's a good point that, you know, that was mentioned earlier, is important. And I think, you know, when I'm scooping my McDonald's soft serve ice cream, I have to say there's joy, right? That first taste. And so I think, again, our children, each of us should be able to have that joy. My sister, when she eats something that she really enjoys, she starts singing. She starts humming and singing, right? And so I think that is something that God has given us as a gift. And so I definitely say the gift of food, I think I mentioned earlier in my presentation, is something that God's given us. And God tells us to seek our daily food. And so again, I think the thing that we should be mindful of is to not, through our actions, take away the gift of the gift, whether it's joy or the gift of generosity or the gift of comfort or, a gift of coming together, a gift of feasting. All those things are, again, God's gift. And unfortunately, I think we as human beings have a tendency to do things that take away that gift of the gift as well. I think Enoch.
I'm so glad I'm here today. I'm so sorry I left dinner for after the meeting. I'm not gonna eat much less now. And I really appreciate your taking both the Old and New Testament about the presence of food throughout the scriptures. And it's very interesting for me that for Christians, the symbol of Christ's presence in the community is the table. We come to the table to remember him. So is food. This is one of the sacraments for
It's
Christian.
the bread of life.
That's right. And then we come to the table to remember, and we belong to one another at the table as well. But it seems my family came originally from Italy to Brazil, and then in Brazil they found churrascaria and they gave up their pastas. This is so much food that people will be invited as well. But it seems to me, of us as listen to you today, is the issue of obsession with things. The good thing becomes a challenge when it becomes an obsession. It's not only the food, and I really enjoyed that you brought another perspective of this scene as more than food. It's about having more stuff. And it seems in our culture, I find myself, is that things that we have are not enough. We're obsessed with other things. It could be food or friends or entertainment. We are not satisfied. We're not happy what we have. So the first bite of that fat is the joy. Want the whole fat for ourselves, and that's the challenge.
Yeah. Thank you. And actually now, bone marrow is kind of the in thing. And I have to say, like Korean barbecue, it's called Hyepin. We've eaten that kind of bone marrow element. And so actually, I like the meat right around the bone versus the actual meat itself. So again, in each culture, there's again this swing that goes back and forth that, again, we should be mindful of. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. Well, I think it's 8 o'clock. I don't know if we should be closing.
Yes, I think that, does anyone else have anything else they wanted to add?
I thought I saw Ellie's hand up. Did she put it down?
Oh, Ellie?
Oh, I put it down if we're out of time, but I guess what I just
hope you're not, when you're talking about gluttony, you're not going to say anything bad about me in front of all these people.
Yes, as someone who lives with a glutton, I just wanted to share. No, I think that when we're talking, I think it's such an interesting idea how much is too much. And I was really intrigued by the question of like, is gluttony ever good? And balance is such an overused word, but it really does, I think, ultimately have to do with the idea of harm. Like at what point is pleasure tilting into harm? And in our culture, in our capitalist culture, that can be when our harm is that so many people are living in poverty, when others have so much that, that is causing harm. So that's wrong. And it might be however much I might enjoy eating. If I eat all day long and miraculously don't become overweight and I don't even destroy my health for some bizarre reason, it's still harmful to me because I become a monomaniac, which has got to be harmful for my personality. So maybe harm is the boundary that turns pleasure into gluttony.
I think that's a really good perspective that I'm going to take away with me tonight. I do have to say, again, the word gluttony, that definition could vary. My husband and we talk about going to French restaurants, and I guess he had read somewhere that their definition of why they give like such small portions to the cost of the meal, right? Is because they want to leave you wanting. So I could imagine like in the French culture, like American turkey, Thanksgiving would be like beyond the definition of gluttony as well. But again, thank you so much, Ellie, for that definition. I think that seems to be right on that, our joy, the gift, becomes no longer a gift when it switches over to a place of harm, whether it's inflicting harm upon our own body or inflicting on others who may be there hungry, and we are turning our backs, away from them. That also then again allows the society to also, I think, become more corrupt and in a way, there's a word for it when it's inner destruction. How do you call that? There's a word for that. But anyway, I think a society that's generous to one another is a more beautiful society that brings joy for everyone together.
Well, thank you very much, Hyepin. I thought that was wonderful, and I'm just glad we got through the gluttony without talking about our trip to Texas. So,
Is that Ellie?
yeah, our way through the state. That was awesome. Anyway, that was fascinating, and thanks, especially in these times. Thank you, guys.
Anyone.
Pardon?
We didn't harm anyone when we went through Texas.
Sure, a couple cows and pigs died for the cause, but anyway, thank you guys very much for being here. Our next one will be on January 9th. It will be led by my buddy Billy Ray, who's a writer and director, and the subject will be envy. And I believe it's January 9th. It's whatever the second Wednesday is. So we'll be back for that. I hope you'll all join us. Hyepin, great job. It's always great to see you. And I realized the reason I got the math wrong is we've known each other 20 years because it was the 10th anniversary of the riots that you did that. So we've known each other a long time, and this was fun. Hope everybody has a very happy and healthy holiday season, and please stay safe and wear a mask. Don't be a glutton for space or just having your face shown. Wear a mask. It's real. It's scary.
It is. So thank you, everyone. Good to see some of you, including Michael. God bless you.
Bye, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye.